In an old house where shadows and broken promises had long rotted, a young woman decided to reclaim what was rightfully hers. This is not just a story of betrayal, it is the journey of finding back the trust and freedom that had been stolen from her. And when every truth was laid bare, no one could stop her from standing up anymore. When Harper was 23, she remembered clearly the morning when the pale, golden sunlight streamed through the old window of the small house her grandmother Edith had left her in the suburbs. Her grandmother had passed, leaving behind this cozy little home nestled under the rustling maple trees, a place where Harper had spent countless summer days filled with the hum of cicadas and the faint scent of lavender. The house was not grand, lacking expensive paintings or sparkling chandeliers like the homes of her wealthier relatives, but it was rich with warm memories and was the last gift her grandmother had given her. This granddaughter she had always held close and told, "You deserve a place of your own." Since moving in, Harper felt her life gradually settling into a steady rhythm. During the day, she drove almost an hour and a half to the Horizon Analytics office in downtown Brighton, where she worked as an accountant and was one of the most promising young employees. Each evening after work, Harper would return to that house, cook simple dinners, and tenderly care for the potted plants Edith had once cherished, feeling as though her grandmother was still there watching over her on her loneliest days. The house, with its cream-colored walls, low eaves, and creaking wooden floors beneath her steps, had become Harper's fortress, a peaceful haven no one could steal or demand she give up. But then, like a small crack creeping through a sturdy wall, that peace began to tremble one Sunday afternoon. When she heard the knock at the door, Harper never expected that the person standing outside, her mother Claire, would bring a sweet smile and a plan that was ready to destroy everything she thought she had secured in her hands. Claire entered with a caring look in her eyes, her gray gaze laced with a worry that Harper no longer believed was sincere. "Harper, you know your stepfather Ronald and I are still struggling with the house in Brighton, right? And you're here so far from work, always rushing every morning, so tired. Have you ever thought about switching places with me?" Claire asked her question, like a cold draft slipping through the cracks of a tightly closed door. Claire continued, her voice soft, as though to lull Harper into submission. "You know, the house in Brighton is much closer to your office. And Ronald and I, we've always dreamed of living somewhere with a garden with trees. Edith's house is just perfect for your mother's old age." Harper sat frozen, listening to each word her mother spoke, as if they were drops of honey in her ears. She hadn't had time to think it all through, only heard Claire keep pressing gently. "You don't have to worry about anything. You'd just continue paying the mortgage in Brighton as if it were rent. We're family, why bother with messy paperwork or expensive lawyers?" Harper felt conflicted. She knew Claire was charming, always knowing how to sway people with her gentle smile and honeyed voice. Every reason her mother offered was true. The drive from Edith's house to Horizon Analytics was long and grueling, and the traffic jams on rainy winter mornings left Harper arriving at the office drained. And the house in Brighton, modern, comfortable, only a 10-minute drive from work, was something she had dreamed of more than once during those damp, chilly days. Harper looked at her mother's hands gripping hers, the same hands that had lifted her up when she was a child, that had held her when her world fell apart. In that moment, Harper wanted to believe that her mother's words came from love, not calculation. She nodded her agreement, hoping this would be a new start for the whole family. But deep inside, a small voice still whispered a warning. Sometimes the sweetest promises come from hearts full of ambition. And Harper didn't know that her agreement was the door opening onto a tragedy that had been planned for a long time, one where she, the one who always believed in family, would have to face the harshest betrayal of her life. Harper moved into the house in Brighton on an early autumn day when the roadside trees were tinged with orange and yellow and the sky stretched endlessly above. She remembered clearly the feeling of excitement and confusion as she stepped into the new house, a spacious place with gleaming wooden floors, large glass windows catching the morning light, and a modern kitchen she had dreamed about on so many lonely nights. Her mother Claire stood on the porch with a satisfied smile, her voice soft and coaxing. "You see, Harper, this is the place meant for you, close to your work, close to the opportunities you deserve." Harper nodded, telling herself that everything would be all right. She even felt grateful. Grateful that she no longer had to rush through crowded streets each morning to make it to work on time, no longer arriving at the office polished, but exhausted from the long commute. Every evening, Harper cooked dinner in the fully equipped kitchen, the warm yellow light reflecting on the ivory mugs, and she began to feel as though she was finally finding her place, as though this house had become part of her, part of the future she had always longed for. Not only did Harper make every mortgage payment on time, she sent more than was asked, believing that this extra care would help her mother pay off debts more quickly. Each month, she transferred the money to her mother, always adding a gentle note. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of everything." She wanted everything to be secure. Wanted her mother and Ronald to have peace in the little garden house that had once belonged to Edith. She bought new furniture herself, replaced the old worn-out lights with sleek recessed fixtures, repainted the walls in soft shades of green, bringing a fresh, calming air to every corner. She spared no effort, no money, hoping only that everything would be as her mother said, the family building a new happiness together. Each time she came back from Horizon Analytics after a long day, Harper stepped into this house as if she were crossing into another world, quiet, warm, far removed from the noise outside. She would sit on the soft sofa listening to the wind sighing through the large windows and imagine the future. A future where she no longer worried about distance, no longer struggled to find her place. Here, Harper told herself she could start again from a job on the rise, from the little nest egg she had painstakingly saved to pay off the debt faster, from a life that no longer felt like a constant search for belonging. Each time she sent a payment larger than what was required, she smiled and thought, "Almost there, almost to the day when the debt is gone." But in the stillest nights when the yellow lights were off, and only the faint beat of her own heart echoed in her chest, Harper still felt a nameless unease flickering in the darkness. Because sometimes what seems too easy, too perfect, is nothing more than a trap waiting for you to step inside. And Harper didn't yet know that every dollar she sent, every change she made, wouldn't bring her the peaceful home she imagined, but would only draw her deeper into a family game that had been planned long ago. On the day Harper returned from a long business trip to Portland, the night had already fallen and a light rain misted the empty streets. She sat behind the wheel, her heart full of anticipation, for the moment she would return to the familiar haven to wrap herself in her favorite soft blanket and breathe in the lingering scent of hot tea on the kitchen counter. The car stopped in front of the porch, and Harper pulled her suitcase along the damp brick path, mist hanging in the air. But as she put her hand on the lock, she realized something was wrong. The familiar key no longer fit the lock. She tried again, turning it gently, but only heard the futile click of the mechanism. A wave of unease crept over her like the chill wind slipping through the thin fabric of her coat. The lights inside were still on, warm yellow spots spilling from the window frames, and Harper could hear the sound of laughter, an echo that should have been comforting but now only made her shiver. She was still fumbling when the door suddenly cracked open, and in the dim glow of the hallway, light Jenna, her half-sister, stood there with a composure that seemed impossible. Jenna wore a soft fur robe, her bare feet gliding over the wooden floor. She gave a faint smile, her gaze indifferent, as if Harper were just some uninvited guest. "Oh, you're back," Jenna said, her voice light as a feather, but it caught in Harper's throat like a stone. Harper looked over Jenna's shoulder and saw a strange man, Jenna's new husband, reclined on the sofa she loved. his feet propped up on the coffee table Harper had so carefully polished before she left. All of her familiar things, the wall art, the reading lamp, were now just the backdrop to a new family living their lives so comfortably in her absence. Your stuff, I put it in the garage. Jenna continued, her hand smoothing a golden strand of hair as though they were making idle chatter. You know, this is our house now. Mom and Ronald gave it to us as a wedding gift. Harper stood frozen, her suitcase still in her hand, her feet rooted to the ground like stone. She looked around one last time, trying to find a trace of herself. Those photos she'd hung on the walls, the little potted plant she'd nurtured through the spring. But everything had been replaced with new frames, new laughter, cold and indifferent. The shock Harper felt wasn't just the pain of losing a place, it was the silent cut of betrayal. She realized then that 4 years of paying off debts, 4 years of believing in her mother's promises, were nothing more than a cruel joke. Everything she'd built, every sacrifice she'd made for this house had been discarded without a second thought. Jenna lifted her hand to gently close the door, her lips curving into a faint smile. You should go. My husband's about to watch the game. You know it's not nice to disturb a family night. And just like that, the door clicked shut, laughter still echoing inside, as if Harper had never belonged here at all. In the drizzle of the rainy night, Harper stood there, her suitcase heavy in her grip, her heart even heavier in her chest, and she understood that the worst nightmare of her life had only just begun. Harper stood there beneath the eaves of what had once been her home, her cold hands still clutching the handle of her suitcase, her eyes fixed on the door that had slammed shut, like an invisible blade, severing the last thread of her trust. The rain had stopped, but the chill still clung to her skin, numbing her fingers. Inside Harper, a wave of anger rose, making her whole body tremble, but above all was a formless dread, a dread of everything she had ever believed about that word family. She turned and step by step dragged her feet back to the old car parked under the sickly yellow glow of the street lamp. The streetlight illuminated her puffy eyes, swollen from tears that hadn't yet fallen, and a face just beginning to taste the bitterness of betrayal. She couldn't remember how long she had driven, only that she stopped in front of her grandmother's old house, the place that was now home to her mother and Ronald, the people she had once believed were her family. The white-painted wooden door was ajar, letting out that warm yellow light that had once seemed so welcoming, a light Harper had remembered on winter nights coming home late. She pushed the door open, not bothering to knock, and Claire's eyes met hers like a cold dagger. "Harper, you're back?" Her mother said, her voice still sweet, but the nervous tension beneath it was plain to see. Harper didn't wait for her mother to ask questions or to offer her the soft false words she knew too well. "Do you know where Jenna and her husband are?" she asked, her voice hoarse from holding back her fury. Claire took a breath, then let it out slowly, smoothing the pleats of her dress as if she were straightening out a roll she'd been preparing for years. "Harper, don't make this into something bigger than it is. You know Jenna and her husband needed a fresh start. And you can manage on your own." Harper tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, the sound of it echoing in the room still filled with the faint scent of Edith's old lavender. "What are you saying? I paid that mortgage for 4 years. I believed you when you said, 'We're family. There's no need for messy paperwork.' And now I have no place here." Claire lifted her head, her eyes flickering for just a moment before settling back into the indifferent stare Harper had grown so used to. "Don't be selfish, Harper," she said quietly, her voice cold as ice. "You have to think of your sister. We're just doing what needs to be done. You're young, there's still time for you to start over." Harper let out a laugh, dry and broken, cracking from her chest. "Start over? Where, Mom? I put everything I had into that house, all my hope, all my work, not just for me, but because I trusted you. Trusted this family." Claire turned away, saying nothing. Ronald's figure appeared in the doorway of the dining room, his hands in his pockets. His eyes lowered when they met Harper's. "Harper, don't make a scene. He muttered, his voice thick as if the taste of red wine still lingered in his throat. You know this place isn't yours anymore. It's time you learn to accept that. In that moment, Harper realized that everything she had clung to like a shield, trust, gratitude, the duty of a daughter, had been stripped away mercilessly. She took a deep breath and turned away from that door that had now become a wall between her and what she had once called family. Harper stepped outside, not saying another word. The night rain still hadn't fully stopped, droplets drumming against the eaves, and Harper knew tonight she had lost not just a house, but the illusion of a family that had never truly been hers. But perhaps in that very moment she found something worth more, a resolve to never again let herself be pushed into the shadows by people who only spoke of love when they needed it to cover up their betrayal. Harper drove through the night, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her mind adrift in the fog of betrayal. The streetlights blurred across the windshield like little flickering fires dancing before her eyes, but all Harper could see ahead was a long, endless road, the road that would take her away from the old ties and toward justice for herself. All the way, the cold, cutting words of Claire and Ronald echoed in her ears like wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. By the time dawn broke, Harper pulled up in front of an old brick building at the end of a quiet street, the office of Attorney Peterson, a name she'd gotten from a colleague at Horizon Analytics. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, feeling determination surge with every breath she took. Mr. Peterson greeted her with a firm handshake and a calm, sharp gaze that was nothing like the false smiles Harper had faced for so long. In that small office lined with law books, he listened as she recounted every detail: the house, the years she had poured sweat and tears into, every mortgage payment, her mother's promise that we're family. We don't need messy paperwork. And finally, the painful moment her own sister had thrown her out. Mr. Peterson sat silent, his hands folded, his eyes steady and resolute. Ms. Harper, that house is still in your name. Without legal paperwork to transfer ownership, they have no right to take it from you. We will prepare all the necessary documentation, he said, his voice as sure as a promise. A spark of hope lit in Harper's chest, a faint light in the darkness that had seemed so endless. 3 days later, she returned to Edith's old porch, the place Claire and Ronald now believed they owned, but this time she no longer trembled or doubted. At her side was Mr. Peterson, walking slowly but firmly, a stack of documents held neatly in his hand. They stopped at the door, and when Claire emerged with a strained smile, Mr. Peterson spoke in a cold, even voice. We are here to deliver a formal notice of eviction. By law, Ms. Harper is the legal owner. Your family has 3 days to vacate these premises. Claire's face went pale, her lips quivering as if to protest, but under Mr. Peterson's calm, unyielding gaze, she could only stand there, speechless. Ronald stepped out behind her, his face red with anger, but he too had no words to challenge the truth. Harper stood tall, her breath steady, feeling for the first time the power of justice, the weight of undeniable evidence. 3 days, 3 days for Claire and Ronald to understand that greed and lies always come at a price. In that moment, Harper realized she wasn't just reclaiming a house, she was reclaiming her right to decide her own destiny once and for all. Harper returned to her grandmother Edith's old house early on the 4th morning, when the dawn light was still shy behind the row of maple trees, and saw no cars parked out front, no deceitful laughter or watchful eyes peering from behind the windows. The house stood silently on the narrow street, as if it too was sighing in relief along with her. She stepped inside, her shoes crunching softly over the muddy footprints left by her mother and Ronald in their hurried exit. In the quiet, she felt the stillness of a place that had finally returned to the hands of the one who deserved it. Her belongings had been hastily packed into cardboard boxes stacked in the corner of the room, the small paintings she had once hung taken down, leaving behind bare nail marks, silent witnesses to the rush and ingratitude. Harper walked through each room, her fingertips brushing the white walls she had carefully repainted after every gray winter. everything still seemed to carry her breath. But it had all been disturbed so rudely drawers forced open kitchen cabinets, a mess of torn, crumpled notes. She bent down and picked up a scrap of paper, her own familiar handwriting still clear. Save more, each month. Pay it off soon. Harper held the slip of paper, her heart twisting painfully. She remembered every dollar she had sent, each one accompanied by hopeful, trusting words, never knowing they had been used by Claire and Ronald for lavish vacations for the new house they so proudly called our family's home. The photos her mother had sent from Paris, from Rome, pictures Harper had once believed were the well-earned reward for her sacrifices, now flashed in her mind, like raw cuts exposing the greed she had been blind to for far too long. In the kitchen, the old kettle still sat on the stove, like a memory of Edith, and Harper gently laid her hand on it, breathing in the faint lavender scent that still lingered somewhere in the walls. She knew that this house, and all the memories she had poured into it, had come back to where they belonged, back to her. But Harper also understood that in reclaiming the house, she had cut the last thin thread binding her to the sweet-sounding promises of a family that only knew how to demand. It was over. Tonight she would sleep in Edith's old bed, in that room still fragrant with old wood and the soft whisper of wind through the curtains, and tomorrow she would begin again. No one could ever again demand she give herself away for nothing. In this very place, Harper knew she had reclaimed not just a house, but herself, the woman who had once believed in family, once believed in sweet promises, and now understood that nothing is more precious than her own freedom and self-respect. The news of Claire and Ronald's downfall quickly spread through the hushed phone calls between old family friends and relatives. Harper heard those snippets of gossip like fragments of broken glass reflecting every dark corner of the greed now laid bare. They spoke of how the bank had sent foreclosure notices for the house that Harper had spent 4 years paying the mortgage on. They spoke of Ronald's arguments with the loan officers, of Claire's hollow stare when there was nothing left to cling to except her laments about the injustice they themselves had created. In those stories, Harper no longer saw her own shadow, no longer the daughter who was supposed to shoulder the family's burdens, no longer the one sending money to maintain their empty illusions. She was just a spectator, standing at the edge, silently watching the final curtain fall, exposing all the manipulations they had hidden behind the mask of family. Harper knew that Jenna was no longer the proud new bride in what was once her home. The promises of an easy beginning had vanished like mist when the bank called, when the bills no longer had anyone to pay them. Harper heard that Jenna had cried and begged her parents for help, while Claire wept and wailed about how her daughter wasn't capable of repaying the debt, as if it were somehow Harper's fault for no longer carrying it all for them. But Harper just sat on Edith's old rocking chair, her hand gently stroking the worn armrest, her gaze as calm as a lake after a storm. She no longer felt pain or regret. The only thing she felt was relief, a peacefulness that had been buried for years under the weight of the obligation Claire had chained around her like an invisible leash. Harper understood that this wasn't a victory. She had no desire to compete with anyone anymore. This was simply the natural end for the seeds of deceit they had sown, the sweet words they had used to hide their greed and selfishness. And now Claire and Ronald would have to face those consequences themselves, a debt no one would shoulder for them anymore. Harper knew they would find every way to blame her, but she no longer cared. She had already made her choice to keep only one thing: her pride and her faith in herself. In the late afternoon, as the light swept through the old windows of Edith's house, Harper realized that though the storm had passed and the wounds were still there, she was no longer the one who had to patch the holes she didn't create. And in that moment, Harper knew she hadn't just reclaimed a house. She had reclaimed the right to her own life, a right no one could ever take away again. The final morning of that storm, Harper woke up in the fragile sunlight filtering through the curtains, gently brushing her tangled hair like a soft caress of peace. She sat up, her bare feet stepping onto the old wooden floor that still held a trace of the night's chill, but she no longer trembled. In Edith's house, where childhood memories and laughter had long since faded into stillness, Harper felt a new quietness, as though after so many years buried under deceit, she had finally found herself. She no longer counted the dollars she had spent on a house that was never hers, no longer looked for an apology from those who had betrayed her. What Harper kept now was her pride, her resolve never to let anyone else decide the course of her life again. She poured herself a cup of hot tea and sat by the window looking out over the small garden where Edith had once grown lavender, the tiny purple blossoms swaying in the morning breeze. The faint aroma of tea mingled with the damp earth, reminding her of the beginning when she still believed that family meant unconditional sacrifice. Now Harper understood family wasn't always a safe place. Sometimes family were the ones who would push you into the abyss and then expect you to thank them for the lesson in growing up. Harper no longer wanted to repay anyone with her years of silent endurance and weary compliance. She no longer wanted to be the quiet shadow behind those who always demanded she give up more to keep their illusion of a home alive. As the afternoon settled in, Harper sat in Edith's old rocking chair, gently swaying with her slow, steady breath. This place, every brick, every crack in the wall was a witness to the childhood that had passed, and the start of a future no longer strangled by hollow promises. She knew Claire, Ronald, Jenna, all of them would try to come back, try to persuade her to open her heart just so they could take advantage one more time. But Harper had changed. She was no longer the one who kept up the family illusions, no longer the daughter who forced herself to please everyone only to be met with thanklessness. She would never again be the victim of those who only knew how to demand, never how to protect. And so, in that moment when the house returned to her hands, Harper had given herself justice not through hatred or revenge, but with the resolve never again to lose her right to own her own life. In that stillness, she felt her heart like a calm lake, reflecting the broad blue sky above and a future with no limits to hold her back. Harper had finally reclaimed the house, and more importantly, she had reclaimed herself strong, resolute, no longer letting anyone exploit her kindness. This was not just the end of a family story. It was a wake-up call to anyone who felt shackled by empty promises. If you too have ever felt you've sacrificed too much for others, remember you deserve your own happiness and your own freedom. Share this story if it touches you, and don't forget to follow for more powerful journeys to come.